right. This should hopefully be a short overview if you have never taken a classics class before and just want a quick and dirty what and when and where is classics. So there's a lot more detail we could go into, but this will maybe be a 5 or 10 minute quick overview that should hopefully just orient us to some of the big kind of questions and themes and things that we're going to need to think about when we think about what classics is. So let's get this shared. What? So classics is an oddly interdisciplinary field. As an academic discipline, it is it's basically kind of everything that happened in a certain time and place. And most disciplines aren't designed this way. This is kind of a relic of classics being at the center of higher education for a long time. The idea that like all Greek and Roman stuff is its own specialty and it should be its own discipline. Um, this means that as a field, it actually has a ton of like hands in different disciplines or fingers in different disciplines, I guess. So literature. This is a big thing that we think about when we think about classics. We're thinking about ancient Greek and Roman texts, things that come down to us, have been preserved in manuscripts and papyrus and other kinds of things. And so we've got the literary aspect, archaeology, art history. This is looking at material culture. So any kind of digging up ancient temples or statues or houses, anything like that is also a part of classics. And at Gonzaga, our archaeologist actually lives in the history department. Sometimes they would be in a classics department, though. Speaking of history, right? So when we're talking about history, as a discipline, it usually lives on its own. Right? We have a history department that is separate from other departments. But when we're thinking about how we study history, a lot of it is going to be through literature or through material culture, right? We can dig things up and find out who lived where and what they were doing. We can read things about, so this is a mosaic of Alexander the Great. And this is a statue of the wolf that suckled the founders of Rome. Though, interesting fact, these are actually a much later addition, the little babies underneath there. So Romulus and Remus are actually added much later. So, but when we're trying to figure out history, history has its own methodologies, it has its own approaches in the same way that archaeology or literary study, you have your own approaches that are unique to a discipline, but the same material that we're working with going to be a lot of material culture or literary evidence. Linguistics. Because the literature that we are looking at is primarily written in Greek or Latin or some other languages, there's going to be a linguistics element. So looking at historical changes in language over time, things like that. This is sort of an overview of the Greek language development over time. And then here, this is some actual more kind of nuts and bolts linguistic study. We do a little bit of that in our classics department here. But again, these are things that linguistics is at a lot of institutions, its own proper discipline and its own department. Religion. Studying ancient religion, which is going to be thinking about a lot of anthropological perspectives. And this is from Greek religion, and then early Christianity is a major religion that develops in areas that are sort of ancient Greece, ancient Rome. They're speaking Greek most of the time. We have people writing things often in Greek, sometimes Latin. And so the kind of early development of Christianity is also something that is sort of within the time and space that classics usually concerns itself with. So here we have Petrus and Paulus, and then the Chi-Rho, which is Greek letters here. So seeing this mix of as early Christianity is arising in the ancient Mediterranean, kind of all different places that are central to the development there. So religion is another big aspect, theology, philosophy, right? Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, tons of philosophical traditions get started in the time and space that we think of as classics. So classics is sort of a weird discipline in that sense that we have all these different little bits and pieces, and it's whatever parts of these take place in the ancient Mediterranean. And then we have reception, which is the study of classical stuff after the ancient Greek and Roman time periods. So things like Percy Jackson and the Olympians, or Toni Morrison's Beloved, which has a lot of echoes of Medea and ancient Greek tragedy, or the movie Gladiator, or the video game Hades, right? All of these are using Greek and Roman things in a modern context. And that's all what we put under the umbrella of classical reception. And that's also a part of the discipline of classics. So it's a weird discipline, and it's got a little bit of all different stuff in a way that is not necessarily common to every discipline in the university. Where used to be Greece and Rome is how we would sort of define classics. Recent trends are getting us to think more about how interconnected all of these different areas are, right? So Greece, here's ancient Greece. And you'll notice all of these red areas. These are places that had Greek settlements. Over here, this is what was called Magna Graecia, Big Greece, Sicily, southern Italy. And then this map, the purple is Phoenician influence. So we're getting trade all over the ancient Mediterranean up into the Black Sea. We have the Persian Empire over here. We have a lot of contact between Greece and Persia. So classics is widening its gaze a little bit to think about not just Greece and Rome, but kind of the much more broader and interconnected world that both of those kind of civilizations narrowly conceived are part of. If we look up here into the Roman Empire, you'll notice that at some point, most of the ancient Mediterranean is under Roman control. And so when we talk about Greece and Rome, we're not just talking about the city of Rome, but Rome's empire and its imperial kind of conquest, its colonization, its places that it conquers, gives us a much, much broader world. We might also think about the ancient Near East, often ancient Near East. So if we're thinking about Egypt, which is out there having a civilization well before anything much is going on in Greece, Hittite Empire, Assyria, Babylonia, Elam, right? We might be familiar with some of these names from the Hebrew Bible, where a lot of them show up. So the study of all of these places, the study of the Hebrew Bible, the study of ancient Egypt, all of those are things that are at least classics adjacent, and oftentimes people who work on these things often also will work within a classics department or think of themselves, they'll be trained in some way as classicists. In particular, because in later time periods, Rome controls Egypt. Alexander the Great conquers Egypt at one point. And so there's a lot of cultural contact between Greece and Rome and somewhere like Egypt or the Near East, things like that. Again, just looking at sort of, this is, if we're thinking about Greece, right, a little bit more of a close-up. So we can think about all Sparta, Athens. Over here is Magna Graecia, right? We have Etruscans who are there before the Romans get going in Italy, an earlier civilization. And so in terms of where, mostly ancient Mediterranean-ish, but that also is a little bit loose. When? Well, this is a good question. This is a timeline I pulled up when I said ancient Greece and Rome timeline, just to give us something to work with here. And you'll notice, right, these are just a bunch of authors. Herodotus is a historian, Solon, Pythagoras, mathematician, and kind of a weird dude who had a lot of more mystical opinions as well, but also triangles. Alexander the Great, Socrates, right? So we've got all that going on in Greece. Rome is also having its own Roman Republic, right? We're getting Terence, Julius Caesar, Virgil, Pliny. So we've got the Roman Empire going on here. You can see this timeline. So negative 800, 800 BCE up until, 400s, 500s. And we can see this is kind of Persia, Asia Minor area. Is getting conquered. Rome is taking over things. We get the Roman Empire splits. And then here's a bunch of other just historical things. So Augustus, Civil Wars, the first Olympiad, Pythian Games. So a bunch of different things, the Peloponnesian War, different historical events that are going on. You'll notice that we end sort of on around the sack of Rome. This doesn't include a couple important things. Homer, who kind of a long story, but probably definitely not a real guy, sort of the name given to a poetry tradition, a sort of oral poetry composition tradition. But Homer, the first stuff is being composed in the 800-ish vicinity BCE. Ancient Greeks would have told you that Homer, the Trojan War and things were taking place in our terms, 1200-ish BCE. And so, a little bit before any of these written records of Lycurgus and so on and things. But we have an oral history tradition, oral literary compositions going on back here. And then this acts like the sack of Rome is the end of Rome. At this point, we're really over just moving into the Eastern Empire. And Byzantium, Constantinople is going to continue to be a major player up until the sack of Constantinople in the 1400s. So, but I mentioned reception and Greek and Roman culture, literary production, art, all of that continues to be really influential, more or less from when it's created until now. Greek culture gets taken up by the Romans. Romans export all over to provinces and they're taking over. Eventually, we have the rise of the Holy Roman Empire. We have the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. And then we get sort of things die down for a bit. And the Renaissance, we have a rediscovery of Greek and Roman culture. And then eventually the British Empire is going to think of themselves as sort of the heirs to this kind of legacy of European empire, and they're going to go colonize the world. And one of the things they bring with them is their education system, which really places a heavy emphasis on Greek and Roman education. This is a real quick and dirty world history of classics, but and so you suddenly have the export of Greek and Roman culture and the texts that people have decided are important are suddenly casting a huge wide influence into basically everywhere that Europe colonized, which is a whole bunch of the world. And so we have tons of cultural output. These are ones that I thought might resonate with you all, but we have Renaissance art, we have Birth of Venus. Most of these are fairly contemporary. Antony and Cleopatra here, this Cleopatra movie. We have a recent Rihanna as Medusa, Hadestown musical, Total War, Rome video game, Goddess Girls. Wishbone was a personal favorite of mine. It's a little Jack Russell Terrier, dresses up and reenacts all sorts of different classical works of literature. Song of Achilles, After Sappho. Just a lot of and this is not just limited to Europe or to the United States. This is something that you see a ton all over the place because classics in a lot of ways become synonymous or associated with colonizing powers. You get a lot of fascinating uses of Greek and Roman tropes and mythological figures and literary conventions and things like that, allusions, as a way to push back or subvert or challenge dominant narratives. So, for example, you see all different parts of Africa. You see classical texts being used as a way to challenge European colonizing powers and governments and things like that. The Caribbean, there's a rich tradition of using classical texts there as well. So when we talk about kind of from when these things were made, more or less, Dante is thinking about classical tropes. Milton, Shakespeare, right? Tons of people are looking back to Roman comedy, Greek tragedy, history, all of these different kinds of things. And so when we talk about what classics is, it's a really broad time and space. And one of the cool things is that this gives us a lot of different areas that we can examine through a lens of classical antiquity. Okay, thank you.